So the Eternals have taken quite the beating from critics that a lot of people would have expected would have defended this film because they've shielded for so many, especially Marvel films. And I suspect there's a story that's been told by others quite a bit about the war between Bob Chapek and Kevin Feige. Bob Chapek being the head of Disney, and Feige being the head of Marvel. But Disney owns Marvel, so guess who's on top? And a lot of these Marvel movies that might not have been all that popular had a lot of muscle and help from Disney. But that doesn't appear to be the case suddenly. To the business of the shield media, just going on about what a lackluster and boring and dull film this is, and that they praise Chloe Zhao for her previous work, but that perhaps she wasn't the right choice to helm a superhero action flick and that sort of thing. But there's also the latest about it won't be seen in countries like Saudi Arabia and whatnot. And so isn't that great? Marvel's standing up for their values because, there's a gay couple in the story and that sort of thing. And is that what it is? Well, they threw everybody else under the bus for previous films. It's because, I think, it's because Disney is not going to do that this time around. So, there's that story. And I talk about that because the behind-the-scenes stories, and you'll hear it from people like Doomcock and Midnight's Edge and Cameron Pasha and all that sort of stuff, it's far more fascinating than the actual lore that's produced by current Marvel films and TV shows. So there you go. So the beating it's taken, a lot of it is earned. The movie is rather dull, but it's not as dull as I expected it to be. Some of the characters I thought were somewhat likable, but their moments are rather brief, and that goes for all of them. It's a bit crowded, but it's the Eternals, not the Eternal, so there's no real star here, unlike the comic books, when there's one very obvious one. So if I guess by the comparisons of these rather lackluster films, Black Widow and Shang-Chi were certainly better films than this one, if for nothing else, adventure and excitement. Shang-Chi probably comes out to be the bigger winner, even though at this point I did not like all three of these films. I didn't care for. The Eternals might have been something that I would have cared about. I could see that there was potential in it, but it just sort of fizzles. They don't really resolve the Thanos thing. They're presented that their mission was to defend the Earth from these creatures known as the Deviants. They completely rewrote, well, not completely, but pretty much rewrote the story from the comic books. And that was to be expected, but I would have thought there would be some amount of elements in attempt to maintain its overall story. With the change, obviously the race swapping and gender swapping and all that stuff they did to check off the check boxes for the PC cult was done, but for the purposes of the plot in the movie, it's not in your face all the time. And unlike stuff like Kurtzman's Star Trek, for example, which does that all the time, whereas here, it is what it is, and they move on, which is kind of the old way the old Star Trek would do. That was the Star Trek way of the old days, and that sort of thing. And it's all very fine, and especially with the gay couple, with the character of Phastos. I've read quite a bit of Eternals comics, most notably the series that was done, the miniseries in the 80s. And stuff like that. But Phastos was a character I don't recall any romantic stories about him, so it's kind of, you could do what you want. But other things are quite a bit of a leap. Makari, the big one, they gender swapped him into a woman and deaf, so that's two you do. The character of Cersei is completely rewritten. I mean, that's not her personality at all. She was a rather flirtatious character, a bit of a party girl type, and all this stuff, and sometimes a bit mischievous. The leader really was Icarus, and therein lies the problem. For all the things that I'd heard about it, that it's dull, the plot kind of fizzles, and it does. The business of Thanos and all that is just not very well handled, especially when you consider the Celestials themselves, because they talk about Thanos wiping out half of humanity. He did. But it wasn't just humanity. He wiped out half of the universe. And the Celestials don't step in to stop that? No, that doesn't work. The typical villains of the Eternals within the comics are just barely there. They're not really even, that being the Deviants, they're just dumb CGI animals, really. The whole story of Crow and everything, it's just not there. They don't use them. They're just tossed around, and that's it. Just falls flat very quickly. Druig, the character who is often seen as somewhat of a villain in the Eternals story, he's not. He's a bit of an a-hole here and there, but that's about it. No, it turns out, guess who's the villain? And this is where I had no idea that this was in there. Should have known, because as I was watching it, I was like, I get their point that it's not as woke as they said it was. And in a lot of ways, it isn't. I mean, yes, they checked the boxes. They've got their gender and race swaps and all that stuff. But overall, that really wasn't that big of a problem for the story, which did have its problems. But it wasn't that, and I was thinking, I see the point on that as I'm watching it. And then here we go. Icarus is he's the star of the Eternals. Now it's a failed series in a lot of ways. It was never as popular as something like X-Men or the Avengers or anything like that. Never reached the status of certainly not Spider-Man or Superman. Never got there. And not even in the case of like the New Gods, which was sort of the precursor to this when Jack Kirby left DC to go back to Marvel, and he creates the Eternals, which was sort of his second shot at this idea of gods and whatnot. But even the New Gods, Darkseid became a star and became a big deal for the DC universe overall, a villain for Justice League and whatnot. Whereas Eternals never really produced anything like that. But their main big star was Icarus. He was the Superman of the team. He's the golden boy. He's this heroic man by all the standards of that. He never had a relationship with Cersei, as far as I remember. Cersei and Makari did. I guess they could still do that to check off another box if they wanted to. But he was the big hero. So guess who the real villain is? Yes, Icarus betrays the team, murders Ajax, Selma Hayek. Selma Hayek is dead at the beginning of this story, really. Her story is only in flashbacks and all that. So that's the big spoiler. Sorry, I should have warned you, because that's supposed to be the twist. It's the twist of the plot, because it's left that, she was killed by the Deviants, but it was actually Icarus who set her up and sort of fed her to the Deviants, and that's that. So they completely destroyed his character, and in this era, and with all the gender and race swapping and stuff they did for the purpose of the cast and what have you, and that's all the marketing they did for it. They did nothing for the actual story to get people interested in what this could mean for the MCU overall and stuff like that. And going through it, I was like, they did it again. The marketing is so bad for this movie. They might have almost had something. I don't think it ever would have been this grand wonder. But they completely destroyed Icarus. Because, he's no Luke Skywalker in popularity, but the idea is the same thing. So he's destroyed and taken down because he's a man. And, of course, in the comics, he was even blonde and blue-eyed. And of course, his eyes glowed a lot. I can't even remember if they were blue or not. But, he had the Superman eyes, and all of that. And so to say it's not really that woke, it's a stupid marketing, and it is stupid marketing. But there's a more serious wokeness to it than just the superficial tokenizing crap and all that stuff, which is definitely what it is. But in some elements, it kind of worked here and there. The Gilgamesh being Asian, I would have thought that would have been an Arab man. And the other characters were fine, I thought. Let's see, who am I thinking? Oh, Makari's, the biggest one that was changed. That was a bit ridiculous. But the rest, it was fine. It didn't bother me that much. But this is, it's just a nasty thing to do. Dane Whitman, Robb Stark's brother, Jon Snow, he's just there to be introduced. I guess they have plans to do something with him because he is the Black Knight. He's this character that becomes the Black Knight. And the only tease of that is right at the end where he's in love with Cersei and wants to have a life with her and all this stuff. And then she has to reveal all her secrets to him and everything. And then he says, it turns out I've got a secret myself. But then because of what happens in the plot of the movie with the Celestials and all that, it ends sort of on a cliffhanger for Cersei anyway, and the rest, I guess. And a bit about that is just that they took things more from, I guess, the Neil Gaiman series more. It would have been better if they had just adapted that in total. Much better story. It's not that great, but it's better than this. And they stole top to bottom the business of the Celestials being that the Earth is an egg for the Celestials. That's from Earth X, which was a far superior story. Earth X was posited as being sort of like the conclusion of the Marvel Universe story. It's like the future, sort of like what Dark Knight Returns is supposed to be for Batman, and so on and so forth. And so that's what they did in that story, and the ultimate reveal was the Earth was an egg containing the Celestials, and that was the ultimate plot, not just for the Eternals, but for the superheroes, the mutants, and everything. They're seated on the planet by the Celestials in order to defend the planet against destruction because the Celestials growing within it. And the biggest threat was Galactus, and it turns out that's why he was destroying the planet. It's not just to sustain himself, but because turns out the Celestials were not very nice guys and all that. So that was the plot there. They just sort of skim that off and stick it in here. So there's going to be a big bad confrontation, I guess, but it depends on how much money the movie makes. And the Marvel brand's still strong, so it can make some bucks, I suspect. But because I was just figuring, whatever, but it's always something, and this really sticks in my craw. Because unlike most people, I haven't read all of them. There's other versions and stories of the Eternals, but I read a good bit, and I just, you gotta keep disrespecting everything, so that's what they did. So there you go. I will be reading the original Eternals series for my Mr. Nailsin Sunday Comics stories that I do for every Sunday on my channel, and you can check that out there and join me as I tell you the story of the real Eternals. Thanks for watching and listening. Say, while you're still here, why not like and subscribe and share with your many friends? Yes. Also, check out my mini stores in the link description below. Yes, where you can get t-shirts, hats, mugs, all those goodies with my artwork on them. Oh, yeah. And head over to indieplanet.com and pick up a copy of my comic book, Night Night. Oh, yeah. You can also catch me at my podcast, Mr Nailsin Show, on RadioMisfits.com. And you can also watch my videos on BitChute.com and now on Rumble.com. Oh, my goodness, so many places to watch me and my stuff. Oh, yeah. And if that's not enough for you, well, you can follow me on many social media platforms and say hi to your old pal, Mr. Nailsin.